Hi, I'm Amy O'Donnell from Sew with Amy, and welcome to my YouTube channel and to my latest little project we're going to work on today. This is something really quick and fun, and it's suitable for a beginner sewer. We're going to make these pretty spring and summer placemats. You can just choose a background fabric and dig into your scraps and sew some pieces together, and these are super quick and easy to make. I chose this is my background fabric that I chose. This is just kind of a neutral, funky fabric that goes with all colors. And then I dug into my scraps and I made these color strips. I used some backing that I had around left over from a quilt that I made before. And I used my flanged binding technique to finish the edge of the placemats. So here's one of the placemats I made. And here's the other. And I've just gotten kind of funky. They don't have to match. Nothing matches nowadays, right? We can have fun with color and play around with color. So these are the placemats we're going to make today. Let's talk about what you're going to need to get started. The first thing you're going to need is this pattern called Color Streaks Runner and Placemats. And this is a download from Annies.com. And you can just download it. There's instructions for a table runner. And there are also instructions for placemats. And today we're just going to focus on the placemats, because if you can master the placemats, you're in for the table runner. And then you can adjust the table runner to be the size appropriate for your table. The other thing we're going to need is background fabric, assorted fabric scraps for this color streaks. We're going to need thread. We're going to need some backing, some batting, and some binding. And we're not going to go over the quilting part. I quilted mine using my walking foot. And really quite easy to do. I put my edge guide on and I just quilted them with the walking foot. But for today's video, we're going to focus on the construction of the placemats. You're going to need a sewing machine, obviously, with basic sewing tools, including your friendly seam ripper and just basic sewing supplies, bobbin, thread, extra needles, that kind of thing. So when we come back, we're going to start making these cool placemats. First, we're going to cut our background fabric. And we're going to be cutting enough fabric for 2 placemats in this video. So I've got a 12.5-inch piece of fabric times the width of fabric. So I took a width of fabric and I cut a 12.5-inch piece off of it. Here are my selvages right here. And then we're going to use this to do the background fabric for our placemats. So the first thing I'm going to do is remove the selvage, which is very important. So I'm going to line up my ruler here. I'm going to remove my selvage, so we don't have to worry about that. Next, we're going to cut 2 2.5-inch strips. So I'm going to line this up to 2.5. And this would also be a good way to use your stripology ruler if you have one. So here's 2 2.5-inch strips. And then we need 4 3.5-inch strips. So we're going to line it up to 3.5 and do that twice, because we've got this is a double layer. One. You can tell I'm getting ready for a new blade in my cutter. You know how you get that feeling when you're sewing? I always say, why didn't I change it sooner? And there's the 3.5-inch strips. And then we need 2 4.5-inch strips. So 4.5. Now, if you're changing the size of your placemats, 2, 3, 4.5. If you're changing the size of your placemats from what she says in the pattern, then you need to adjust these pieces accordingly to give you what you're looking for. So here we go. This is what we've got. So what we're going to be doing, I'm just going to leave these doubled up for now. We're going to lay these out. And we'll be inserting our color strips in between these pieces of fabric. So let's set these aside for now and work on our color strips next. Next, we're going to talk about cutting our fabric strips to piece together our color streaks, which is the name of the pattern for our placemats. She says in the pattern to cut your pieces of scraps anywhere from 1 1/4 to 2 inches wide and 7 to 8 inches long. So that's what I've done here. Let me give you a tip on these. The top and the bottom piece, you don't want them to be super skinny, because when we put our binding on, this is what, I mean, this is okay if it doesn't bother you, but this piece of pink is swallowed up pretty much by the binding. That's a lot of seam action going on in one area. So I've just kind of cut mine so that I've got wider pieces at the top and bottom, but that's really a matter of personal preference. Okay, so these are some that I've already cut for one set of placemats, and now I'm going to show you how to cut these other ones. So I've got these sewn together. My longest strip is like right at 8 inches all the way down to just over 7 inches. And I've already evened up this edge. So just kind of sew them together, grab them out of there at random. It's very cathartic because you know you're making room for new fabric when you do this, right? So pull your scraps out and cut them up. And now we're going to subcut these and get ready to make our placemats. So we want to cut 2 strips that are 1.5 inches, or 4 strips that are 1.5 inches. Okay, there's 2. So I've already cut 2 for this other placemat. So, and then we want to cut one that's 2.5 inches and then another 1.5. Or you can even add more strips if you want to. Or you can make your strips wider if you want to. That's the wonderful thing about our hobby. We can do it our own way, right? So I've got my strips cut, and I'm going to put these together with the other ones that I did earlier. And we'll start putting the placemats together. So here's all the strips I've got, and these are the ones that I did earlier before I started the video. And you can turn them, you know, if you're using the same strip on a placemat, you can turn it a different direction and have it have a different look. You know, you'll have it, you know, the yellow will be at the bottom and the pink at the top and vice versa. So mix them up, cut your strips, and then next we'll be at the sewing machine and I'll show you how to assemble these. Okay, so now I've got my placemat pieces laid out here on my mat. And I've got a 2.5 inch piece, a 3.5 inch piece twice, so 1, 2, 3.5 inch pieces, and 1 4.5 inch pieces. And I've got my strips that I assembled and then subcut in between. So I'm going to head to my sewing machine to sew these together. I'm going to shorten my stitch length to right around 2.0 because these have been trimmed, and I just want to make sure the stitches are very secure. So I also shortened my stitch length when I stitched these strips together, when I sewed these seams, and that's important. I don't know if I mentioned that earlier or not, but you need to have your stitch length shortened. So I'm going to go to the machine and I'm going to stitch these together, and then I'm going to press so that the seams go toward the solid pieces of fabric, away from the pieced pieces of fabric. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to stitch together my 2 placemats. I'm going to show you a little trick here really quick. Hang on a sec. To carry this to the sewing machine, I'm going to lay it out on my portable design board. This is a piece of foam core board that I bought at the dollar store that is very handy for carrying things around my sewing room securely. There's nothing worse than gathering something up and going to the machine and like, oh, now is this the way it goes or is this the way it goes? So this foam core board comes in extremely handy for transporting things safely around the sewing room. So let me head over to the machine, and when I'm back I'll have my placemats sewn together and we'll talk about the next step. Okay, I've got my placemats sewn together, and I laid them out like she tells you to on the pattern. I've got my alternating 2.5, 3.5, 3.5, 4.5, and then I put my strips in there, my pieced color streaks, and I sewed them together. Like I said, I shortened my stitch length, and I pressed the seams when I was finished toward the background fabric. You want to press away from where the most seams are, so they naturally want to go that way. So I pressed them toward the background fabric, so this is what it looks like from the back. I did have to stop a couple of times and trim off these ends where they were too long, you know, because when you're just kind of piecing the strips together, you don't really know how long it's going to be. So you do have to stop periodically and trim off those tails before you stitch on your next piece to keep your placemat straight. So in the next segment, I'm going to make my quilt sandwich, which consists of my batting and my backing. And then I'm going to show you briefly just how I use my walking foot for quilting. When I make a large quilt, I typically send it out to have it quilted because free motion quilting and that is not my thing, especially with a large quilt, and I just have a regular domestic size sewing machine. But I do like the effect of using the walking foot to quilt, and I use my edge guide, you know, to make my lines, and it can have actually a very contemporary look. So in the next video segment, we're going to talk about using your walking foot for quilting and how to put your walking foot on your machine in case you've never done it. It'll just be very, very brief. Okay, now I've got my quilt sandwiches made with these placemats. So I've got my backing fabric, my batting, and my placemat itself. And I always cut the backing and the batting to be just slightly larger than the placemat so that when I start my walking foot, I can start it out here and not have to reverse or worry about threads, you know, in here and stuff. So I start out here, and I'm going to show you how to use the walking foot. One thing that we need to do before we start using our walking foot is we need to place just a few random pins on here just to hold it steady till we get some of the quilting done. So I've already done this piece, and let me show you how to do this. I have this cool little tool here called the Quick Clip. And it's a little wooden tool that somebody invented and probably made $1 million after they did. But man, it saves your fingernails when you're doing this pinning. So how it works is this. I take a pin, straight pin, and I stick it into my fabric like this. And then I use this to close it. So I don't have to be putting my finger down there and wrestling with my fabric so much. So I'm just going to stick some pins in here really quick. And to get us ready for our walking foot. I don't know if you've ever used your walking foot before. Some people have the walking foot. They don't even know what it is. Maybe it came with your machine. Maybe you've bought one and just never got around to figuring out how it works. To me, it's a great invention. And even when you have a machine with dual feed, I've got a Bernina with dual feed, the walking foot still is a necessity to be able to have the foot quilt through these thicknesses without causing a pucker in your fabric. So I highly recommend that you become friends with your walking foot. It's an important thing, and it's a great tool. And some of the walking feet can be kind of expensive, so you just have to watch for your dealer to have a sale on the walking foot, and then you can maybe get 25% off or something like that. But that is a great thing to have. Another thing I want to talk about is this book. This book is written by Jackie Gehring, and it's called Walk. And it's all about getting used to using your walking foot, and especially for quilting. Now, I said earlier, I will do quilting on placemats, table runners, baby quilts. But when it comes to my bigger quilts, I just have to send them out. I'm just not willing to risk messing them up after all the effort I've put in. But, you know, maybe you're different. Everybody's got a different tolerance. Maybe you've got a bigger machine with a larger bed and you can handle a larger quilt, but it's just something that I can't do. Anyway, this book is very handy. She has in here a ton of ideas about how to quilt, and we're going to use something similar to this today, which is just a curved crosshatch across our placemats. And that's what I did on the other two that I made. But she has got tons of ideas in this book about using your walking foot. And if you have any interest in, you know, developing a friendship with your walking foot, I would highly recommend this book by Jackie Gehring. So that's my little pitch for today. The Jackie Gehring book and the Quick Clip, so you can save your fingernails when you're pinning things down. Okay, next we're going to be at the machine. I'm going to show you how to attach the walking foot, and we'll just show a little bit of how this works. Okay, now I'm at my sewing machine, and I want to say a few words about the walking foot. This is my walking foot. It goes on my Bernina 570, and this is the edge guide that goes with my walking foot. So in order to make these precise lines on the walking foot, you can make your first pass, and then you can just line up your other passes with the edge guide. And when I unscrew this little screw, this will move in and out So you can make it as wide or as narrow as you want. So, so that's how the edge guide works. Every walking foot usually comes with an edge guide. Some of them have a screw like this, some of them don't, but they're all pretty much the same. If you have a machine that you don't have a walking foot for, you can go to sewingmachinesplus.com or allbrands.com and put in the make and model of your machine, and they will tell you which walking foot you can buy. And some of them are only, less than $20. Some of them are a little more than that. But I would highly recommend getting one if you have any interest at all in doing some of this quilting yourself on smaller items. So the thing that makes the walking foot so magical is this little hook right here. And this, when you put this onto your machine, your needle screw or whatever you do when you insert a needle has to go in here. And when that is done properly, it causes the foot to hop up and down when the presser foot goes up and down on your machine. When the needle goes up and down, this will also go up and down. So that's the magic of the walking foot. It goes up and down and allows your machine to jump up over bulky fabric items and stuff. So let me show you now how to put the walking foot on your machine. So I disengage my dual feet. Normally on my 570, my dual feet is down and I have to disengage it or my walking foot will not fit. So I'm going to slide my walking foot on, and I'm going to take this little piece right here and make sure it goes over my screw. This is my screw that holds my needle in, but this little thing has to go right over it. And then I'm going to push it up and I'm going to put it into place. And there, my walking foot is ready to go. I've threaded my machine up with some black thread, which is what I think is appropriate for these placemats. And what else do I need to tell you? I think that's about it. I've got my seam guide all set here too. So I'm going to put my placemat on here. So I'm going to do just like a swoop on here. And I've got my stitch length. I got to change it to tell what foot is on my machine. Let's see here. And the walking foot is foot number 50 on the Bernina. So now I've got my thing all set. Now when I do this sewing on here, I need to make sure I dodge these pins. So I will be stopping to take the pins out periodically. But I'm just going to do my swoops in one direction, but you can actually do a cross hatch and make it look really cool if you want to. In that book, there's lots of ideas, or even if you just Google walking foot quilting designs, there's lots of ideas out there on the internet. So let me just take a few passes here, and then I'll stop the video and finish these up, and then we'll regroup and we'll talk a little bit about finishing and binding. Here we go. Stitch length 2.5. I'm just going to do a little swoop right across the center. And here's what my first pass looks like. I just took a swoop right across that placemat. Now I'm going to do the second swoop, and I'm going to line the first swoop up on that edge guide. And I'm going to take a second swoop. Now I've got to stop here and take out a couple of pins. There we go. Do this really quick because I know it's no fun to watch me sew. Now here's my second swoop, and you can see they're equidistant apart based on that edge guide. And I'm going to keep going back and forth. I'm going to go all the way this direction, then I'm going to turn my placemat and do the other half of the placemat, and I'm going to do both of them. And when we come back, we're going to talk about trimming them up and what we might do for binding. All right, the placemats are all quilted. I used my walking foot like we described, and this is how they turned out. So you can see the rows are very even along the back, along my backing and along the front. I just did a gentle curve. With the walking foot, you're not going to be able to do swirls and things like that. That's not the nature of the foot. But for a more clean, contemporary look, I would highly recommend the walking foot for your quilting. Let's go ahead and trim one of these up, because that's when it really starts to take shape, is when we trim it up. So I'm going to lay my ruler on here, and I'm going to give it a good trim. Just line it up. This is when I always like to trim things, because that's when it really starts to look like what you've made, you know. It really starts to look like a placemat. Yay! We're going to talk a little bit about binding before I sign off. I went to a quilt show probably 5 or 6 years ago, and I ran into someone who was demonstrating a flanged binding technique, or I guess some people would say it's an imitation flange. And I have been hooked ever since. I do not like hand sewing. Hand sewing is just not my thing. And here's our placemat all trimmed up. What do you think? Beautiful. All trimmed up, ready for binding. Anyway, I was at this show, and this woman was demonstrating this flange binding technique. And I thought, this is genius because, first of all, it's easy, which is numero uno to me, and it requires no hand sewing, which was good too. And to me, I like to add a little flair to my project. And when you do this flange binding, you add a little stripe of accent, a little accent stripe around the edge of your placemat or whatever it is you're doing. I put these on all my quilts too, these flange bindings, because they can be applied by machine. I like that. So anyway, I've got some samples here of the binding that I used on my placemats. And what it is, it's a piece of fabric, and you cut your accent stripe 1 3/4 inches wide, and you cut your actual binding stripe 1 3/8 inches wide, and you put them, you sew them together in 1/4 inch, then you press them in half, and this is what you end up with. So it's really counterintuitive that this piece be cut wider, but that's how it is. So the accent stripe is 1 3/4, and the binding piece is actually 1 3/8. So what you do then, when you put it on, you apply it from the back, like so, okay? And you sew your 1/4 inch. You sew your 1/4 inch right along here, and then you turn it over, and this is what it looks like on the front of your placemat. And then I use my edge stitch foot just to stitch this down around the edge, and this is how it turns out. Use your edge stitch foot to stitch it down. So if you hop over to my other video I have on the YouTube channel called Finish It With a Flange, it describes in detail how to use this technique to finish your quilts or placemats or baby things or whatever it is that you make, pot holders, whatever. But to me, it's a wonderful time saver because I do not like hand sewing. So anyway, I want to thank you for joining me today for this placemats video. And I hope that you will return to my YouTube, my Sew with Amy YouTube channel in the future for more videos. Become a subscriber and find out, what's going on. Be an insider. So thank you again, and I hope everybody has a great day.